Welcome to the deep dive. We often get questions about, the big picture in evolution.
Absolutely, those fundamental why questions.
Exactly. And today we're diving into one that, well, it's always seemed really odd to me. Why apes? Why Africa and Southeast Asia, but apparently not South America?
Hmm.
Especially when you look at those huge rainforests there. You'd think similar environment, similar equatorial zone, but nope, no native apes.
It is a striking geographical gap, isn't it? And we've been digging into Guy Lakeman's book, Evolution and the Adaptation of Intelligence, which tackles this exact thing.
Right.
He brings up some really interesting challenges to the standard story, and he grounds it in that deep time perspective. The asteroid hit 65 million years back, clearing the way.
Yeah, for mammals.
And then hominins, our early upright ancestors, showing up maybe 25 million years ago. It's a vast stretch of time.
Okay, so let's get right to it then. The Amazon, huge rainforest, loads of monkeys, the Platyrrhini, right?
Correct. The New World monkeys. Broad noses, quite distinct from African and Asian monkeys and apes.
But no gorillas, no chimps, no orangutans native to South America. Lakeman really zeroes in on this, and he adds this layer about how maybe the early Western explorers kind of shaped the narrative we have now.
That's a really critical point he makes. He talks about potential biases, even referencing these 2025 claims by some Chinese researchers about colonial-era funding, maybe steering the science.
Staring at how exactly?
Well, the idea is that the funding sources, often Western institutions back then, might have consciously or unconsciously favored research that confirmed existing ideas or focused on certain regions, potentially, overlooking evidence elsewhere.
So our whole picture might be slightly skewed by who was paying for the expeditions back in the day?
It's a possibility Lakeman wants us to consider, yeah, to question the foundations a bit.
It definitely makes you think twice. And then he throws in another curveball, something about planetary motion. He suggests Earth's rotation should actually make it easier to get from Africa to South America, east to west.
Right. That's the intriguing bit. You think about prevailing winds, ocean currents. Generally, there's a westward tendency. So if primates started in Africa,
You'd almost expect them to hit South America before Asia, maybe.
or at least find it easier to get there. Yet, the apes we know evolved in Africa and Southeast Asia. It seems like that direct Atlantic crossing just didn't happen for apes.
Okay, so yeah, the Atlantic crossing. Let's talk about that possibility. Could they have somehow drifted across? Lakeman seems pretty skeptical.
Very skeptical, and for good reasons. I mean, first off, the sheer distance. It's enormous.
We're talking weeks at sea, minimum.
Weeks on some hypothetical raft of vegetation, maybe. These early primates, they weren't sailors. They had no navigation, no supplies.
And totally exposed, right? Sun, storms, salt water.
Not to mention finding food in fresh water for weeks on end. And predators in the ocean, the survival chances seem incredibly low.
Okay, but let's say against all odds, a few did make it. Is that enough?
That's Lakeman's other major point. You need more than just one or two lucky arrivals. You need a viable founding population.
Meaning enough individuals for genetic diversity.
Exactly. To avoid inbreeding issues and, crucially, to have enough variation to actually adapt to this completely new environment.
Yeah.
New foods, new predators, new diseases.
So a tiny random group washing ashore probably wouldn't cut it. The odds of establishing a whole new ape lineage that way are...
Astronomically low, yes. It requires a whole chain of highly improbable events.
Okay, so rafting across the Atlantic seems like a real long shot then. Let's pivot back to where apes did establish themselves, Africa and Asia. What's the story there, according to Lakeman?
Well, the general picture aligns, but he adds his perspective. Hominins in Africa, starting that move towards ground dwelling around 25 million years ago.
Right.
That's the lineage leading towards us.
Right, bipedalism.
Yeah. And then you see the split. In Africa, you get the ancestors of gorillas, chimps, bonobos, apes that spend significant time on the ground.
Okay.
But in Southeast Asia, you have orangutans and gibbons, which basically stayed in the trees. They're highly arboreal.
So different paths in different places. Why? Lakeman has this principle of least action idea.
Yes. It's quite elegant, really. The core idea is that evolution generally follows the path requiring the least effort or energy, unless a major environmental shift forces a change.
Makes sense. Don't fix what isn't broken, evolutionarily speaking.
Kind of. So if Africa's forests started shrinking or changing, maybe becoming patchier, then for some primates, the least action wasn't staying in dwindling trees, but adapting to life on the ground, finding food there, moving between tree patches. That pressure could drive bipedalism.
Okay, that provides a logic for the African apes coming down from the trees. But what about the Asian ones, the orangutans and gibbons, if they stayed tree dwellers?
Exactly. Lakeman points out, if they're so adapted to trees, how did their ancestors get all the way to Southeast Asia from Africa in the first place?
Right, because traversing vast land areas wouldn't be easy for a purely tree-dwelling animal.
Precisely. And we already established the sea route eastward wasn't necessarily favored by currents. So their journey itself presents another puzzle. How did they migrate?
It really highlights how many gaps there still are in the story. Okay, let's move forward in time a bit. Humans evolve in Africa, spread out. Lakeman covers this, right?
He does, noting the later migrations across Africa, Asia, and eventually, much, much later, into the Americas via land bridges. But then his focus shifts.
Shifts to what?
To what he calls the evolution of intelligence. He argues this has become the dominant evolutionary force more recently.
You mean like brain power becoming more important than physical adaptation?
In a way, yes. He traces it from, say, early mathematics through the scientific revolution, and then lands squarely on modern AI.
Ah, okay. And he mentions that specific 2025 benchmark.
Yeah, the idea of machines hitting superintelligence, exceeding human IQ in some areas, passing the Turing test, is presented as a major inflection point.
And how does he view humanity in light of this?
He suggests we might be hitting, maybe, certain peaks. Physical limits, maybe even some cognitive ones, especially compared to the potential of AI. And he raises concerns.
Concerns about what?
About our own ability to manage the problems we create. Overcrowding, environmental damage, that sort of thing. Complex global issues.
And she sees AI playing a role there.
Potentially.
Yeah.
He muses on this idea that maybe, just maybe, advanced machine intelligence could end up being the custodian of human knowledge and history.
Wow. Like if we mess things up too badly, the AI preserves the record.
That seems to be the implication he explores. A rather sobering thought, really. It questions the future trajectory of intelligence itself, biological versus artificial.
So, circling all the way back, that initial question, why no apes in South America? Lakeman doesn't give one simple answer, does he?
No, not at all. And that's the point, I think. He leaves you understanding it's incredibly complex. It's geography, it's the sheer difficulty of migration, it's evolutionary pressures favoring different paths.
And maybe even, like he suggests, the history of science itself playing a role in how we've interpreted the evidence.
Exactly. It's a web of factors. His work really pushes you to look beyond the textbook summary and consider these alternative angles and historical contexts.
Which brings us to a final thought for everyone listening. Lakeman ends by looking at the rise of machine intelligence. So maybe we should ask, is our ability to understand our own deep past, our evolution, now tied up with this new intelligence we're building?
That's provocative. Could AI, with its ability to process vast data and maybe see patterns we miss, unlock new insights into these ancient evolutionary mysteries?
Could the future of understanding our origins lie partly with the machines we're creating? Something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.